Each exchange shapes the final verdict. Every camera uncovers reality. Grasping your legal protections, enforcing true justice.
We're looking for Caroline Augustin. We have reason to believe she's employed at this school.
I don't care what reason you have. You're not approaching any of my teachers without a judicial warrant and proper clearance.
We're federal agents. We don't need your permission.
Actually, you do. This is a school. We have student privacy laws, employee protections, and protocols.
The standoff happened at 2:45 p.m. on a crisp autumn afternoon in the science wing of Lincoln High School in Minneapolis. What started as 3 masked ICE agents demanding access to a chemistry teacher would escalate into an entire hallway of educators forming a human barrier to protect their colleague, a stunning confrontation captured on school security cameras that would go viral within hours, and a federal lawsuit that would ultimately award Caroline Augustin $11.7 million while exposing the dangerous intersection of immigration, enforcement, and education. If you're ready to see institutional racism taken down, like this video and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. And if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now because you won't want to miss tomorrow's story of cops messing with the wrong people and finding out. Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this story. Caroline Augustin was 34 years old, a chemistry teacher who'd been working at Lincoln High for 6 years. She was Haitian American, born in Port-au-Prince, but brought to the United States as a 5-year-old when her family fled political upheaval and violence. She'd grown up in Brooklyn, attended public schools, put herself through college on scholarships while working multiple jobs, and built a career teaching students who reminded her of herself overlooked, underestimated, hungry for someone to believe in them. She was exceptional at her job, the kind of teacher students specifically requested for advanced placement courses, the kind who could explain complex reactions in ways that made them click, the kind who stayed after school to help struggling juniors pass their exams and never made them feel stupid for asking questions. Her lesson plans were inventive. Her labs were the talk of the department. Her students, those who went on to college, remembered her by name. Yet her performance reviews were glowing in private and forgotten in public. Her colleagues respected her work, but her innovations went uncelebrated in staff meetings. Her requests for updated lab equipment were routinely denied. She'd been passed over for department chair twice, always for reasons that felt vague, always in favor of teachers with less tenure and weaker results. She'd become a U.S. citizen through naturalization when she was 18. She had the certificate to prove it, filed safely at home with her other important documents. She had a U.S. passport. She voted in every election. She paid taxes. She'd even served on a school safety committee the previous year, something that required background clearance. She was as American as anyone born on U.S. soil, with documentation to prove it. That autumn afternoon, Caroline was working the day shift in her chemistry lab, a bright, well-organized space on the second floor of Lincoln High that overlooked the football field. She was guiding a class of 16 juniors through a titration experiment, a delicate process requiring precision and focus. The students were bent over their beakers, pipettes in hand, watching the solution change color drop by drop. Caroline moved between the lab tables, adjusting burettes, correcting technique, her voice calm and encouraging even as she maintained strict safety protocols. The work was meticulous, methodical, the kind of teaching that required constant vigilance and split-second adjustments. One miscalculation could ruin the entire experiment. Caroline was at a student's bench, demonstrating proper swirling technique and speaking softly to a girl who'd been struggling with the math behind molarity. She believed in meeting students where they were, not where the curriculum expected them to be. That's when the hall monitor, a nervous sophomore named Travis, appeared at the lab door with an expression Caroline had never seen on his face, a mixture of alarm and confusion. 3 men in tactical vests and dark masks had entered the science wing moments earlier, their boots heavy on the polished floors, their presence jarring against the hum of afternoon classes. They moved with the kind of authority that didn't ask permission, didn't wait for introduction. They demanded to see Caroline Augustin by name, flashing an administrative warrant at Travis with the expectation of immediate compliance. The boy stammered, pointed toward the chemistry lab, and the agents pushed past him without another word. Inside the lab, Caroline froze mid-sentence. Her students looked up from their experiments, confusion rippling through the room. The agents appeared in the doorway, framed by fluorescent light, their vests emblazoned with letters that made Caroline's stomach drop. ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. One agent stepped forward, hand raised as if to silence the room before anyone could speak. The school's protocols for law enforcement visits were clear. All external authorities were required to check in with administration, coordinate with the principal's office, and follow student privacy guidelines. These agents had done none of that. They'd bypassed the front desk, ignored the visitor sign-in sheet, and walked straight into an active classroom as if the rules didn't apply to them. Their justification, delivered in clipped, unyielding tones, was an anonymous tip. Someone had reported Caroline Augustin as undocumented, as someone who didn't belong. A few scattered staff members in the hallway noticed the commotion and moved toward the lab, voices rising in question. A history teacher asked the agents to wait. A math instructor stepped in front of one agent, blocking the path. The tension was immediate, palpable. These were educators trained to protect their students, their space, their colleagues. The agents brushed past them, insisting they had authority to question Caroline's immigration status, to detain her if necessary, to take her into custody if she couldn't produce proof of citizenship on the spot. Principal David Reynolds emerged from his office at the far end of the hallway, drawn by the raised voices and the sudden disruption. He was a man in his 50s, calm in demeanor but unyielding in principle, the kind of leader who believed rules existed to protect people, not to be bent for convenience. He moved swiftly toward the chemistry lab, positioning himself firmly between the agents and the door. His voice, when he spoke, was measured but absolute. He demanded a judicial warrant. He cited student safety laws. He invoked employee privacy protections. He made it clear that without proper authorization, the agents would not take another step. The agents radioed for backup. They threatened obstruction charges. They insisted their administrative warrant was sufficient. Reynolds didn't move. He called school security. He called the district's legal advisors. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, his body a barrier the agents couldn't legally cross without escalating to physical force. More teachers gathered, drawn from adjacent classrooms by the commotion. A dozen educators materialized in the hallway. Math teachers, English instructors, the school librarian, the vice principal. They formed a loose semicircle around the lab entrance, their bodies shifting subtly to block access without aggression. It wasn't planned. It wasn't rehearsed. It was instinct. Collective instinct to protect one of their own. Inside the lab, Caroline stood behind her colleagues, her heart pounding, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the edge of a lab table. She thought of her naturalization ceremony at 18, the pride she'd felt raising her right hand, swearing the oath. She thought of her U.S. passport sitting in a drawer at home, useless to her now. She thought of her students, still frozen at their lab benches, watching this unfold. She said nothing. She refused to engage without counsel. It was the only power she had in that moment, silence, stillness, the quiet resilience she'd built over years of being underrated and overlooked. The security cameras in the hallway captured every moment in high definition. The agents' tactical vests, the teacher's defiant semicircle, Reynolds' unyielding stance in the doorway. The impasse stretched into minutes. Students peeked from classrooms, whispering, filming on phones. The atmosphere was chaotic yet contained, a standoff unfolding in real time with no clear resolution. Caroline's mind drifted, unbidden, to her arrival in the United States at age 5. She remembered the chaos of Port-au-Prince, the night her family fled, the separation from relatives she'd never see again. She remembered her mother working 3 jobs to keep them housed. She remembered scholarships and late-night study sessions and the isolating grind of putting herself through college while her peers partied and networked. She remembered landing at Lincoln High, excited to teach, only to find her methods questioned, her innovations dismissed, her voice ignored in meetings where mediocrity was celebrated over excellence. The human barrier solidified. Teachers exchanged glances, silent communication passing between them. Reynolds leveraged his authority, reiterating the school's private property rights, the need for proper verification, the legal requirements the agents were blatantly ignoring. He refused to let them advance. The agents attempted to sidestep the group, to maneuver around the semicircle. The teachers shifted, closing ranks. No one raised a hand. No one raised a voice. They simply stood, unyielding, embodying a cross-racial allyship that needed no words. The standoff was entering its 15th minute when the agents' radios crackled with incoming instructions. Backup was delayed. Legal counsel was en route. The situation was being assessed. The agents' frustration was visible now, their body language shifting from confidence to irritation. They issued warnings. They threatened consequences. But they didn't move forward. They couldn't. Not without risking assault charges against a dozen educators, not without creating a scene that would be impossible to justify. Carleen remained behind the wall of her colleagues, silent and shaken, her quiet strength beginning to surface. She had survived worse than this. She had endured years of being underestimated, neglected, passed over. She had buried secrets deeper than anyone knew. And now, surrounded by people willing to risk their careers to protect her, she felt something shift inside, a resolve, a clarity. If they wanted to come for her, they would have to go through all of them. School security arrived at the 2:58 mark, 3 officers in Navy uniforms moving cautiously into the hallway, assessing the scene with professional neutrality. They'd been briefed by Reynolds, over the phone federal agents, no judicial warrant, disruption in progress. The security team positioned themselves between the teachers and the ICE agents, not as enforcers but as mediators, their presence a signal that the situation was being managed through proper channels. The lead security officer, a former police detective named Marcus Webb, conferred briefly with Reynolds, then turned to the agents with a calm directive. Any action involving school employees would need to be coordinated through administration. The school's legal team was en route. Until then, the agents were asked to wait in the main office or leave the premises. The masked figures didn't move immediately. They stood in the hallway, radios crackling with static, their frustration now visible in the way they shifted their weight, adjusted their vests, exchanged glances behind their masks. The impasse held for 25 minutes total, a tense standoff that felt longer than it was, every second documented by the hallway cameras in crisp, undeniable detail. The agents couldn't push through without risking assault on educators. They couldn't legally detain Carline without proper verification and authorization. They were outmaneuvered, trapped by the very protocols they'd attempted to bypass. District administrators arrived at 3:12. 2 lawyers from the district's legal office, briefed and urgent, reviewed the administrative warrant the agents had flashed. They declared it insufficient for detaining an employee mid-shift, emphasizing due process, the disruption to student learning, the lack of probable cause. The agents protested, citing anonymous tips and database matches, but the lawyers were unmoved. Without a judicial warrant signed by a judge, without coordination with school administration, the agents had no authority to proceed. The lawyers made it clear, leave now or face legal action for trespassing and interference with educational operations. The agents retreated at 3:18, filing out of the science wing with tight, clipped movements, their parting words a warning that the matter wasn't resolved, that Carline Augustin would be contacted again, that failure to cooperate would result in consequences. Reynolds watched them go, his expression unreadable, his body still positioned protectively in front of the lab door until the agents disappeared down the stairwell. The aftermath was immediate and emotional. Staff members exhaled in unison, the tension breaking like a snapped wire. Teachers hugged Carline, praised her composure, reassured her with words that felt both comforting and surreal. She was shaking now, the adrenaline ebbing, replaced by confusion and disbelief. Reynolds pulled her gently into his office, closing the door behind them, assuring her of the school's full support. The district would provide legal counsel. Human resources would document everything. She wouldn't face this alone. But the question lingered, heavy and unanswerable in the moment. Why had ICE targeted her? She was a citizen. She had proof. Her employment records were clear. What anonymous tip could possibly justify this invasion? The school arranged for an immigration attorney that same evening, a specialist in wrongful detention cases named Rebecca Tran. Carline met with her in a borrowed conference room, still wearing her lab coat, still replaying the standoff in her mind. Tran worked quickly, pulling federal databases, requesting disclosure on the tip that had triggered the visit. What she uncovered was both predictable and devastating. An anonymous caller had reported Carline Augustin as undocumented. ICE had run the name through their system and found a match, a decade-old deportation order for someone named Carline Augustin, deported to Haiti in 2013. But the match was wrong, catastrophically, negligently wrong. The deportation order wasn't for Carline. It was for her identical twin sister, separated during their chaotic escape from Haiti when they were children, presumed lost in the system, deported under a mistaken identity years earlier when she'd been picked up during a raid in Florida. Carline had never spoken about her sister. The pain was too deep, too tangled with guilt and grief. Her family had fractured in the crossing. Her twin had ended up in foster care under a different name, then slipped through cracks Carline couldn't fill. She'd buried the secret, focused on surviving, on building a life her sister never got to have. The revelation hit Carline like a physical blow, her sister. After all these years, the database match had pulled her sister's record, overlaid it onto Carline's life, and sent armed agents to her classroom without a single additional verification, no cross-check of dates of birth, no comparison of social security numbers, no review of employment records, just a name match and an assumption of guilt. Tran explained the implications carefully. This wasn't just negligence, it was a pattern. ICE had a documented history of relying on flawed databases, outdated information, racial profiling. Carline's case was extreme but not unique. The attorney recommended filing a federal lawsuit, Fourth Amendment violations for unlawful seizure attempts, Fifth Amendment violations for due process denial, 14th Amendment violations for ethnic profiling. The twin sister revelation added emotional depth to the claims, transforming a bureaucratic error into a human tragedy. The security footage leaked that night. A teacher who'd been in the hallway, still rattled by the confrontation, posted a 30-second clip to social media with a caption that read, "Teachers form human shield against masked ICE agents trying to detain a colleague. This is what solidarity looks like." The video went viral within hours. By morning, it had been shared across educator networks, immigrant rights groups, news outlets. The footage was stark and undeniable, Reynolds standing firm in the doorway, teachers forming a protective semicircle, agents radioing for backup, students watching from classrooms. Headlines appeared by dawn. Teachers block ICE raid in Minneapolis High School. Educators form human barrier to protect Haitian American colleague. Viral video shows school staff defying federal agents. The story spread with the speed and intensity of wildfire, amplified by the visual power of the footage, the relatability of the setting, the emotional punch of teachers protecting one of their own. Public backlash grew exponentially. News outlets analyzed the footage frame by frame, praising the staff's solidarity, celebrating Reynolds' leadership as an example of cross-racial allyship. Immigration attorneys and civil rights organizations issued statements condemning ICE's negligence, pointing out the failure to verify basic identifiers, the reliance on anonymous tips, the targeting of a naturalized citizen in her workplace. Educators nationwide shared their own stories of similar overreach, creating a groundswell of support for Carline and a broader critique of enforcement practices that treated schools like raid zones. The narrative subtly posed a question to the growing audience. Have you ever wondered if schools should be safe havens from such intrusions? The comment sections filled with responses. Yes, absolutely. Teachers deserve protection. This is why solidarity matters. Schools should be off limits. The engagement was organic, passionate, a reflection of how deeply the story resonated across demographics and political divides. Carline, watching the footage for the first time on her laptop at home, felt something shift. The humiliation of the standoff, the terror of being targeted, the grief of her sister's story, all of it transformed into resolve. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for her twin, for the teachers who'd stood with her, for every educator and student who deserved to feel safe in their classrooms. She authorized Tran to file the lawsuit. Federal court. ICE and the Department of Homeland Security named as defendants. Constitutional violations, emotional distress, punitive damages. Discovery began within weeks, and what it revealed was damning. Internal emails showed agents had proceeded on a name match alone, ignoring protocols that required multi-point verification. Agents admitted in depositions that they lacked field verification tools, that they'd relied on outdated databases, that they'd never checked Carline's employment records or her citizenship status before entering the school. Supervisors acknowledged systemic failures but claimed good faith based on limited information. The defense was weak, reactive, undermined by the evidence at every turn. Carline returned to teaching while the lawsuit unfolded. Her overlooked brilliance was suddenly visible, celebrated. Colleagues sought her input on curriculum. Students organized a solidarity rally. The school board issued a formal apology for the trauma she'd endured. But the recognition, while validating, felt bittersweet. It had taken a viral video and a federal lawsuit for her work to be acknowledged, for her voice to matter. The injustice of that wasn't lost on her. The chapter closed on rising momentum. The lawsuit was moving toward trial. The footage continued to circulate, a symbol of resistance and institutional failure. Carline stood in her empty lab one evening after classes, staring at the titration equipment still set up from that afternoon, and felt the weight of what was coming. Justice as method, not spectacle. Truth as endurance, not performance. She would see this through, no matter how long it took. The lawsuit unfolded over 7 months, building toward a 5-week trial that began in federal court on a cold morning in late spring. The courtroom was packed journalists, educators, immigrant rights advocates, former students. The viral security footage had made Carline's case a symbol of something larger, but the trial itself was methodical, procedural, anchored in constitutional law and bureaucratic failure. The evidence was damning from the start. The prosecution played the security footage in its entirety, every frame documenting the agent's aggression, the teacher's unyielding barrier, Reynolds' calm refusal to yield. Agent depositions were read into the record, admissions of negligence rendered stark in legalese. One agent admitted proceeding on a name match alone. Another acknowledged they'd never verified Carline's social security number or employment records. A third conceded that field verification tools existed but weren't used because of time constraints and resource limitations. Testimonies poured in, each one building the case for systemic failure. Teachers described their split-second decision to protect Carline, the instinct to stand together against overreach. They spoke of her exceptional teaching, her innovative labs, her dedication to students who struggled. They detailed how she'd been overlooked for years, denied department chair positions, ignored in meetings, passed over for resources despite performance reviews that consistently rated her among the top educators in the district. The portrait that emerged was of a woman who'd excelled in silence, whose brilliance had been undervalued until a crisis forced it into visibility. Carline took the stand on the 8th day of trial. She spoke clearly, without theatrics, recounting the terror of the standoff, the confusion of being targeted despite her citizenship, the chaos of armed agents disrupting her classroom. She described her naturalization at 18, the pride she'd felt, the life she'd built. Then she revealed the bombshell that transformed the case from bureaucratic error to human tragedy. Her identical twin sister, separated during their escape from Haiti, deported years earlier under a mistaken identity, the secret she'd carried in silence for decades. The database match that had sent agents to her door was to her sister, a woman she'd lost and mourned and never stopped thinking about. The courtroom was silent. Jurors leaned forward. Journalists scribbled notes. The emotional weight of the revelation was palpable, underscoring the human cost of lazy enforcement, of systems that treated people as data points rather than lives. Expert witnesses testified on constitutional requirements for probable cause, the necessity of multi-point verification, the chilling effect of immigration actions in schools. A former ICE supervisor, now a critic of the agency, detailed how systemic failures were enabled by budget cuts, outdated technology, and a culture that prioritized speed over accuracy. Students from Carline's class, now seniors, recounted how the incident had disrupted their learning, but also taught them about standing up to injustice, about the power of collective action. The defense argued good faith based on limited information, claiming agents had followed available protocols, that the anonymous tip had been credible enough to warrant investigation. But the evidence overwhelmed their claims. School employment records verifying Carline's citizenship had been accessible with a single phone call. Her social security number, different from her sister's, would have immediately flagged the database error. The agents had ignored every available safeguard, proceeding with recklessness that bordered on malice. Jury deliberation lasted 2 days. When the verdict came, it was unequivocal: liability on all counts, Fourth Amendment violations, Fifth Amendment violations, 14th Amendment violations. The compensatory damages were set at $3 million for emotional distress, career impact, and trauma. The punitive damages were set at $8.7 million, designed to deter future negligence, to send a message that constitutional rights couldn't be trampled in the name of expediency. $11.7 million total, one of the largest awards in similar cases. The verdict made headlines immediately. Teacher wins, nearly $12 million in ICE, raid lawsuit, jury awards, millions after viral school standoff. Federal court rules against ICE in wrongful detention case. The aftermath was swift and public. 3 agents were terminated. 2 supervisors were demoted. ICE announced policy reforms requiring multiple identity verifications before any school-based enforcement actions. The reforms were significant, driven by the visibility of Carline's case, the undeniable evidence of failure. Schools nationwide adopted the incident as a case study in handling enforcement, a model for protecting staff and students. Lincoln High installed a plaque in the science wing, brass letters on polished wood. Here, we stand united, protecting our own. It was mounted near the chemistry lab, a permanent reminder of what had happened, what had been risked, what had been won. Carline used part of the award to establish a legal defense fund for educators facing similar threats. She partnered with organizations specializing in immigration law and civil rights, funding training sessions on employee rights, enforcement protocols, how to respond to raids. The fund grew quickly, supported by donations from educators nationwide, from people who'd watched the viral footage and felt compelled to act. She continued her career at Lincoln High. Her classroom was full every semester, students requesting her sections, her reputation no longer underrated or overlooked. Colleagues sought her mentorship. Administrators consulted her on curriculum. The recognition was validating, but it didn't erase the years of neglect, the microaggressions, the quiet humiliations. She carried both the triumph and the scars. Months after the verdict, Carline was invited to speak at a national education conference in Chicago. She stood on a stage in front of 2,000 educators, the viral footage playing on screens behind her, and spoke about what the event had revealed. Not just systemic failures in immigration enforcement, but the power of allyship, the necessity of standing together, the quiet strength that emerges when people are finally seen. She spoke about her sister, about the pain of secrets carried in silence, about how justice isn't just legal outcomes, but the slow, difficult work of making systems accountable. The story concluded with schools across the country citing Lincoln High as a model, with ICE facing ongoing scrutiny, with reforms that, while imperfect, represented progress. The viral footage remained a symbol, shared and reshared, a reminder that collective action could shift power, that institutions could be forced to change when people refused to yield. Carline returned to her lab after the conference, preparing lessons for the fall semester, her hands steady as she organized beakers and pipettes. The underdog had triumphed. The overlooked had been vindicated. But more than that, she transformed her trauma into a platform for change, ensuring that what happened to her wouldn't happen to others. The resolution wasn't just personal, it was systemic. It was enduring. It was justice as method, truth as endurance, power reclaimed through the slow, deliberate work of holding systems accountable.
If you like this video, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Share this video with someone who would appreciate it, and let's keep building this community together. And before you go, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what stood out to you the most. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next.
True justice is an evolving process, and awareness remains your strongest shield. We appreciate your viewership and dedication to clarity.